Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
I think the heart and soul of our DEI efforts really are all of our employees. I mean, we have quite a diverse employee population around the world by any measures, whether that's gender, ethnicity, lived experience, ways of thinking, ways of working. And so actually those employees are the center of our diversity efforts.
That was Rene Yoakum, Chief Customer and People Officer at Remitly, and she is our guest this week on episode 151 of the Leaders in Payments podcast. And I can't think of a better guest to kick off Diversity and Inclusion Month. With more than 40 years in big tech, including 19 years at Microsoft alone, Rene is more than qualified to speak to our listeners about this crucial topic. According to Rene, diversity, equity, and inclusion means making sure your workplace offers a broad set of thinking, lived experiences, and people with different identities and cultural backgrounds. And it's not just about recruiting ethnic minorities. You have to make sure you have practices that allow diversity and inclusion to genuinely thrive in the workplace in a manner that engages everyone from the employee to the customer. For those of you that may not know, Remitly is a money remittance service that helps immigrants send money back to their families and home communities. They serve more than 5 million customers today. We will be discussing everything from best practices for managing large-scale diversity programs to creating a corporate culture that thrives on inclusion and equality. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Rene. Welcome to this special series of the Leaders in Payments podcast about diversity and inclusion. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, Greg. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Great. So tell our audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live, a few things like that.
Sure. I'm the oldest of 6 kids, and my father was a physicist and a mathematician, and all 6 of us have math degrees. So it was a pretty data-driven household. My dad's first job out of grad school was at the Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory in New Mexico. And so I started my school years there, and we ended up winding our way to Seattle, which is where I live now. My dad came for Boeing, and I went to Pacific Lutheran University here in Seattle. And then I also did some post-grad work in London at the Chartered Institute of Marketing. So yeah, I've mostly been in Seattle my whole life, but I did have a good 4-year stint with Microsoft in London, which was an amazing experience, both life experience and business experience. So yeah, that's kind of, but I'm back in Seattle now.
Okay, great. Well, tell us a little bit about Remitly and then about your role there.
Yes, happy to. Remitly is a money remittance service, or we help immigrants send money back to their home countries and communities. We serve over 5 million customers, and we are in about 17 send countries right now and over 125 receive countries in the world. So we're doing large-scale transactions for customers. And it's very purpose-driven, mission-driven, and values-centric organization. And so as you can imagine, diversity and belonging and inclusion are big parts of our culture as well, and how we relate those both to customers and to employees. My job here is I joined almost 4 years ago as the Chief Customer Officer. My background is primarily in customer success and customer support functions globally. But after about 9 months, and I lead our support teams here at Remitly, but after about 9 months, Matt asked me to also take on the Chief People Officer function. While that may sound kind of unusual, I think there's a couple things as you think about people functions, you're really thinking about the employee life cycle and employee experience in similar ways that you think about the customer experience. So that was quite translatable to meet our employees where they are in their relationship with Remitly and make sure we're serving them. And then secondly, especially as we've scaled from, in my time here, around 500 employees to now over 2,000, operationalizing the people function is as important as operationalizing your customer success so that the experience that every employee has is sort of predictable and repeatable. And brings our values to life for employees. So I have the luxurious role of being the chief customer and people officer at Remitly.
That covers like every human in your ecosystem, right?
I mean, who's this lucky? I mean, it's an amazing job because I think we get to, the value flywheel of if employees are closer to customers, they create better products and services. And for us at Remitly, many of our employees have joined because of their passion for our customers and for the mission. And so actually by having them be close to customers, they're more engaged as well. So we get this sort of double flywheel effect by bringing the customer and the employee really closely together in our business.
That's awesome. So talk a little bit about your background prior to joining Remitly.
I've been in big tech for almost 40 years, starting with mainframes, literally, all the way to the mobile and cloud world today. So it's been quite an evolution, both for me personally and obviously for the industry. I've always I started out as a programmer, but what I really found is I loved working with people to help them solve problems. So I quickly got into sort of the budding field of customer support and customer success, both as an agent early in my career and quickly into management and leadership. I did that at many tech firms, and then I joined Microsoft in the late 90s and was there for about 19 years doing a variety of things, both customer support globally, but also I worked in the business groups. I worked in our small and medium sales teams. As I said, I had the opportunity to work in London and do some competitive marketing strategies. So I got to do lots of kind of broad things around the company. But I'll just tell you, Greg, my DNA is helping people and helping customers and now helping employees as well. And so I came back. My final job at Microsoft was leading the global consumer business. That was all languages, all products, all countries. And that was an amazing experience, which set me up to really understand delivering at scale. So then when Remitly came calling, I had never been in the startup world before. I'd kind of always been in big public companies. And so it was an amazing opportunity to be in a mission-driven company where I felt like what I have done and learned in my career could help Remitly. And I'm humbled to tell you how much Remitly has helped me grow as a person and have more impact in the world through the work I get to do every day.
That's awesome. Well, the topic of this special series is diversity and inclusion. And I guess over the years, people have added in diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, belonging, and inclusion. So there's a lot of different ways to phrase it. We've always just kind of stuck with diversity and inclusion. But let's talk about it first at a high level, say the 50,000 foot level. What does it mean to you? How do you define diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I think it's making sure that your workplace or whatever you're working in has a broad set of thinking and lived experiences and people with different identities, both gender identities and ethnicity and cultural backgrounds, so that whatever products or services you're producing have a full, rich perspective to bring to the table. And so we have worked really hard at Remitly to tie DEI into our mission, our customers. Ultimately, we can serve up to 1 billion of the 7 billion people on the planet are either immigrants or their families back in the developing countries that they've come from. And so that diversity of our customer set drives us to really think about what does our workplace need to look like in order to be able to purposefully serve the needs of those customers. So that's the way we think about it at Remitly.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the programs and things that you're doing today at Remitly in this space. Like, what are some of the programs or just a high-level overview of how you guys look at it? And then we might dive deeper into a couple of those topics as we go through the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we have 11 affinity groups. So that's sort of let me take a step back, actually, and just say that I think the heart and soul of our DEI efforts really are all of our employees. I mean, we have quite a diverse employee population around the world by any measures, whether that's gender, ethnicity, lived experience, ways of thinking, ways of working. And so actually those employees are the center of our diversity efforts. We do focus on some affinity groups that allow different types of employees or different identities of employees to work together to both educate the rest of the company, but also drive improvements in our products and services and in our employee experience and culture. coming from the perspective of and richness that they bring to the environment. So those 11 affinity groups are really very active in our community, both in terms of teaching and bringing regular monthly events to bear. We have a diversity, equity, and inclusion rhythm of the business. So a cadence, a regular cadence with twice monthly all hands meetings, as well as office hours where people can just come and talk about any kinds of diversity issues that they want to. And then obviously kind of ad hoc open spaces as events might happen in the world that need us to give space to people to be able to share and support each other. We use a learning tool called Crescendo, which gives us weekly tools and tips and lets us all kind of learn about all kinds of different lived experiences. That's been hugely popular and useful and gives us a great grounding for discussions. So many more things we're doing, but that kind of gives you a sense of the way that we keep DEI front of mind at Remitly.
Do you have a person assigned as sort of the head of DEI, or is it more of a volunteer leadership in these different groups and things?
Yeah, great question. About 2.5 years ago, we hired a director of diversity. To say that was one of the best hires in my career, I think. It happened in 2019, and we hired Kim Vu, who's an amazing and talented woman in this space. She was able to sort of help bring some structure. We had a lot of employee activism, which was exciting, but I think sort of unstructured. We were only about 300 people or so at that time. And so I think what Kim was able to bring some really good structure to our affinity groups that helped align and create more purpose and more outcomes from our affinity groups so they could work together towards purposeful, translate their energy into things that really made a difference for the company and our customers and themselves. And then we headed into the pandemic in 2020, to the Black Lives Matter, to working remotely, to just all of the challenges that have kind of been in the world. So it was such perfect and lucky timing that Kim came on board, and she's been an amazing leader. She's now transitioned into a VP of ESG function because we're broadening as we've gone public. We're broadening our efforts to be, with DEI being one pillar of our ESG framework. We've started a Pledge 1% Foundation as part of going public, and she's helping to lead all of our ESG work. But yes, so we have a leader. It's a very democratic effort. It's not abdicated to her. I think everyone feels both accountable and involved in DEI, everyone who wants to be at Remitly. And we certainly talk about it. Our CEO talks about it. All of our leadership team and all of our people talk about how we make sure that Remitly is a place where you can belong and do your best work and bring your lived experience to the table in service of our customers and in support of each other.
And you mentioned a few kind of, I'll call them, for lack of better words, communication channels, town halls, and other things. So could you dive a little deeper into what those are and how you actually execute those?
Yeah, Kim leads a rhythm, and actually the affinity group leaders, we have a leader of each of our 11 affinity groups. They sort of rotate through leading sessions, either based on the calendar and what may be diversity topics for that month that we want to teach or learn on, or things that may be happening in the world where we can host discussions and learning sessions. So they're a combination of sharing in a very psychologically safe space, as well as learning and conversation that help us all grow and perhaps challenge us to grow and think in new ways, right? So every month has a different topic. We've got a US-based DEI all hands, and then we do international ones as well, because it's interesting how, we have offices in 6 different countries around the world, and diversity and inclusion can mean very different things in different countries in terms of the topics that are top of mind in their local culture. And so also thinking about how we bring diversity, make it very relevant. I'd say it's like a global concept with the local relevancy. And so Kim leads some town halls on those topics that might be specialized to the country that we're talking with.
And then you mentioned a couple of times COVID and sort of work from home and that kind of new environment we were all thrown into. And I think many are still struggling with the right long-term solution. How do you feel that has affected the DE&I initiatives, positively, negatively, or maybe not at all?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, I think it's both COVID has had very personal impacts. It's quite different on different individuals based on what they and their families may have experienced. And I think now coming out of it based on individuals' risk tolerance as well, right? I think We're coming out of all the government mandates. And so now people have to make more personal choices about in what types of environments they feel most comfortable working. But I think over the course of working virtually for the last 2 years now, as many companies have, there's a mix of people who feel a lot more comfortable working on Zoom, either with their cameras on. We mostly use our cameras on, but cameras on or cameras off. And people who are really missing the in-person connection and kind of the 3D experience of being with people in person. And so, I think we're all kind of struggling with how we're going to get through both this period and figure out what the next normal looks like for us. But I think everyone from introverts to extroverts to all different kinds of communication styles have had to really think through. And we've had to be super thoughtful about the ways we run meetings and the options and opportunities we give people to work both in person and asynchronously as well.
Sure. And just by the nature of your company, you've mentioned this, your customers are very diverse. And you kind of alluded to it, but maybe we could dive deeper. So let's talk about sort of the hiring process. So employee experience, those types of things. How does that diverse customer set equal the kind of employee experience? And then how does that all tie into diversity and how that's talked about? And then how that whole hiring, and obviously to have a diverse workforce, you have to hire diverse people. So it all has to come together. So kind of curious how the diverse culture, the diverse customers, how that all kind of works together for you guys.
Yeah, great question. I think it's a benefit of us really establishing our DEI approach and philosophy grounded in our customers, right? And bringing people to Remitly who can bring special talents and experiences that can best serve such a diverse customer population. I'm going to start with maybe a non-traditional place. I do think recruiting is super important. I'll come back to that. But what I think is really important once you've kind of grounded DEI in your mission is secondly, to make sure that you do have the practices that allow belonging and diversity to thrive in your workplace. Because I think if you're just recruiting and you're not taking care of the employee experience, then that recruiting is all kind of false advertising in a way, right? And people with all kinds of diverse backgrounds may join your company, but not stay, certainly not recruit other superstars to join them if it's not a great place to work. So we've really put a ton of our effort into making the employee experience strong and live up to our promises in terms of the diversity we bring to the environment. One tool, as an example, that we've been using a lot for about the last 18 months, and it's helped us also in the virtual environment, is called the thinking environment. I don't know if you're familiar with this work that Nancy Klein, who's a UK author, has done. Her latest book is called The Promise Not to Interrupt, or The Promise That Changes Everything. And basically, there are 10 components of a thinking environment. We think of it as our operating system on which our values live, but it has principles like how to listen really effectively, how to not interrupt each other, how people get equality of time in meetings, and diversity of thought is brought out as a value of each meeting. And so we really have used these principles to run our meetings, run our OKR sessions, run a lot of our all hands company meetings. Our executive team uses it exclusively in our meetings. And it's brought like an incredible sense of, I think, diversity and belonging to the team because all different kinds of people get airspace rather than, say, 2 people taking up all the space in a meeting, So practices like that, I think, have really brought diversity to life and so created this culture of belonging and safety that then leads into our recruiting, right? Then all of our employees become recruiters for very diverse backgrounds. Now, we do very specifically focus on recruiting for diversity in our recruiting pipelines as well and put extra effort there. And I'll tell you, because of our mission, maybe it's not that difficult to recruit very diverse people, especially in our more junior roles. But our more senior roles is where we've needed to put a lot of intentionality to make sure we've got very diverse pipelines and that if we have to leave positions open longer, to make sure we're looking in a full 360 for people who can bring all different kinds of diversity to our executive team and our leadership team. We have taken the discipline to do that. So yes, recruiting is important, but I think it's more of a tactic and a tool, and the real work is in to have a strong sense of belonging.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because we have this diversity and inclusion. I think this is the third year we've done this special month. And it's one of the first times I think that we kind of asked the question about hiring, but we talked more about the employee experience, which then translated to hiring. So that's really interesting. I know the answer to this, but I'm curious if we can maybe dig into maybe the how. But I think it's fair to say that you've built diversity into your culture, into your DNA. I mean, it's part of the company, right? So did that happen because of the entrepreneur who started the company and it was very diverse from the beginning? Or did it happen because you have customers who are very diverse in and of themselves? Or maybe if you can sort of identify how did you build that DNA of this DE&I kind of environment that you have today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think our diversity has probably grown as we've grown. We've grown exponentially over the last 10 years since Matt Oppenheimer started the company and Josh Hugg. And, I will tell you, they aligned very quickly on the purpose and mission of the company. And you can read more about kind of our history, but where they spent all their time together and deciding if they wanted to partner and then how ultimately they wanted to build a company was around the culture. And diversity is a big part of our culture, and that from day one. So fintech is an interesting industry in that both, startups have been historically less diverse, both from a gender and a ethnicity perspective, but also technology, there's challenges there. And so I think as we continued to grow, diversity of languages, things like what language you spoke, what countries you came from, that actually brought real day-to-day value to the products that we created and the ways that we served customers. So all those things were kind of valued because they had deep customer value from day one. And now they also were seeing the richness that it brings to the employee experience. I mean, imagine, we're just so lucky to work in an environment where we get to work with people who are also mission-driven and values-oriented, but also super diverse. I mean, I can't remember how many languages. I think it's like 20-some languages our people speak. We just come from all corners of the world, and that lived experience brings a richness to the employee experience that is, hard to replicate.
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back to the affinity groups. You have nearly 2,000 employees, and as you mentioned, 11 different affinity groups. So you're starting to talk about a decent amount of people and a large number of groups. Could you share some best practices with the audience? Like, how do you manage that big of a program? What are some best practices that maybe you could suggest to people?
I mean, I think Kim has spent a lot of work putting the structure into place around our affinity groups, which also, though, support what our employees want to do. A lot of our affinity groups have been born, or all of them really, born out of employee interest and employees wanting to come to the table together around specific topics and specific lived experiences. And so there's structure around their meetings, there's structure around their leadership of the affinity groups, and then the leaders of all the affinity groups work together in a coalition as well. And they think a lot about like how to, number one, serve our customers. How do we bring the knowledge that they can grow in their own affinity groups to the table for better products and services? And so they have channels they not only have channels, they are our developers and our product folks and our analysts and our customer support people. So they are right in the trenches to be able to make improvements. And then also how they work together to teach and learn about each other's identities and experiences so that we have just a rich employee engagement place. So I think there's a lot of structure and there's also a lot of buy-in from our employees. They have a big voice in how the whole process and system works.
Do you have a structured way that these affinity groups communicate up through the management layers of the company?
Yeah, I think by this leadership coalition of the affinity group leaders of each of the 11 groups having a coalition, then they're able to work with Kim and through me and through our executive team to make sure that we're always listening and learning. I will say one thing about Remitly, it's a very non-hierarchical place. So you don't need a structure. Matt's inbox is always open. He's very available. All of us are. And we work in a super open, kind of agile way. And that requires courage, I think, from our employees sometimes to be able to raise very difficult topics. But we between the DEI all hands, which actually an executive team member co-leads with Kim every month. So there's always someone there who's listening and able to action or take away action items that the executive team or the leadership team may need to work on. But also we just have very open communication across the company. So I think people feel empowered to raise issues as they need to.
Okay. And you guys recently, I think, or late last year, went public. So curious if that has had a positive, negative, or really no effect at all on the program.
Yeah, I mean, we had 10 years practice of being a private company and being very focused. I mean, there was no like extrinsic market feedback on the company at all. Like it was all about us staying focused on our customers, on the vision and the mission and the purpose, and measuring our progress in being able to solve customers' pain points by how many customers came to us and stayed with us, right? And that's still what we do. And so I don't think that things have changed radically. I mean, we're growing up, and that requires us to put new processes and some controls in place and certainly be accountable at different levels in the organization. But I think it's all been good. I believe our culture, because we've had so many years of practice, is continuing to thrive. And we're certainly seeing that in continued retention of our employees and high engagement of our employees all throughout the last several years, continuing to grow even since we've been public.
Okay. So for those companies who are maybe just starting out on their D&I journey, what advice would you give them? Where should they start?
I'd probably say three things. I mean, the first is make sure you are aligning the why behind DEI to your company and or ideally your customer in some really meaningful way that will make people understand what the value of diversity is both to your business and to your employee set. So I think spending a lot of time there to get that right and not just make it lip service, like truly think about what it needs to be in order to get the gold out of diversity within your teams. And then the second is kind of what I talked about at length, which is just really focusing on making your workplace a place of inclusion and belonging. It takes a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot easier to work in a homogenous environment. And so the diversity brings challenges and it brings amazing promise and gold. And so the hard work that you do to make sure people can be heard and that even tough topics are raised in safe ways that allow people to grow. I think all of those things are worth it, but they take a lot of effort. They take a great leadership team and management skills, but they kind of take every employee being a leader in how they work together with people of all different styles, colors, genders, everything. And then I guess thirdly, I would say establish a cadence, like put some predictability and rhythm around your DEI efforts, whether that's all hands and affinity groups, and that structure and cadence and predictability give people like keep DEI in the forefront and make it real as opposed to it being something that you just trot out on a quarterly basis or something, right? So I think that cadence is part of what builds safety, that people feel this is like a genuine, authentic effort as opposed to a tick in the box.
Yeah, I think those are three great things that companies could do. Well, how do you think the industry, so if you want to say fintech or payments or fintech/payments, how do you think the industry as a whole is doing on this topic? And then follow on question, what more needs to be done?
I almost want to ask you what you think. I think the industry needs to do better, and we can continue to do better ourselves and learn and hopefully lead in the space. But and I know there's a lot of effort and a lot of people care deeply about improving, and progress looks to be slow, right? So I don't think there are any easy answers. I think the globalization of the world brings us together and gives us more opportunities to have diverse workplaces. I think it just being a conscious effort and top of mind, which it certainly is, also helps. And then it just takes the ongoing work to get the gold out of it so that it's self-perpetuating as well, right? I don't think any of us would say the industry overall is there yet, but I do think there's a lot of progress and certainly a lot of, beyond just good intentions, a lot of hard work that's happening in the space.
Yeah, I mean, I would tend to agree. I think there are challenges with the space because there are a lot of startups. And I think so much money has been invested that your goals are not necessarily aligned with the employee experience when you've taken a lot of money in. Your goal is revenue, profitability, very financial based. So I think that's a challenge. And I think there will always be those companies where they put these programs in place and they're a little bit more lip service than anything. But I think there are, I would say, companies that have dedicated real resources and time and effort, and it has started at the top, and it has either, it's sort of like, I feel like you guys, it was in your DNA from the beginning. It just makes so much sense given your business model, and you guys have purposefully built these programs, and it's part of what you do. There are other companies that are way behind, right? But they have the desire to get there. It's a little bit across the board, I think. And you kind of have to peel the onion back, because are you talking about female leaders in leadership positions, or are you talking about just pure diversity in race? So it's areas, I think, like you said, that the industry hasn't improved, but I think the industry also has a ways to go in some areas. And I don't know how unique that makes us compared to other industries. Probably not very unique, given how much technology is involved. But I think my goal with these podcasts during this month is to bring out these things. And I feel like if our conversation helps one or two companies or a couple of people to advance their programs, then I think it's done what I had hoped it would do. So that's sort of my view on it. I don't know if you agree.
No, I love it. And I laud you for keeping the conversation going, in the public square, and the more we can all learn from each other. And I kind of want to also say, while I've been sort of bragging about a lot of our programs, we have a long way to go too. It's a continuously improve is one of our values, and we are constantly wanting to listen and learn from our people and from the industry so that we can continue to get better. We don't have all the answers, and we're certainly, we're still growing and getting better. So a long way for all of us to go together, I think.
Yeah, great point. So Rene, we've covered a lot of ground on this topic. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss before we wrap up?
No, I think we've covered lots of stuff. There's more. We could keep talking for another hour. We could get into all kinds of things around programs and metrics and stuff. Hopefully we'll have another chance to do that. So
great. Well, Rene, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate all your insights on this important topic. I know you're very busy, so I want to let you go. But again, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for the opportunity to talk about it, Greg. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.